Hey everybody, this is Kevin. I wanted to take a second to thank each of you for joining us for these first few episodes of It's Personal, Not Political with Marcie and Kevin. I, for one, feel incredibly lucky to be part of these conversations. When it comes to Ambreia's episode, I was so blown away by her honesty and her ability to have a candid conversation as she shared her story. Because this conversation was so good, Marcie and I agreed that there was very little we wanted to edit out to get us down to 60 minutes. So as you may have noticed, this is just part one in that conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy, because we couldn't be more excited to share her story with all of you.
A little lopsided, but
For our podcast listeners, we are playing with sensory dough while we record.
I know it's going to be like ASMR if you hear some background noise, right?
Yeah, we need to do the squish. Yeah.
There's an ASMR video with coughing. Just go.
Really?
No, I said I wonder about that. Would you watch that?
No.
I'd be interested to see how it goes.
That sounds awful.
He's
Is that a
to
thing?
try it though. He said he
Is
was.
that a thing? Do people like?
I don't know.
Is that an ASMR thing? I thought it was like
I'm just
paper
making
and-
up stuff.
I don't know, it's like tapping and it's like clearing the throat, right? It's very phlegmy. I don't know. That's for me.
Enjoy this edit, Kevin.
That's your opener.
I deserve that 100%. Okay. We are so excited to have my dear friend Ambreia here to talk with us today. Ambreia and I go way back, and I'm thrilled to have her on the podcast, thrilled to introduce you to my other dear friend, Kevin. We're going to have a grand old time, have a good conversation.
We are. So, tell me, how did you two meet each other? How long's it been?
I think we've known each other for 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somewhere in
That
there.
sounds about right. We knew of each other from church. We went to the same church. But we really met and scheduled an actual mommy meetup in the comment section of a Facebook post.
We didn't schedule the meetup in the Facebook post. That'd be weird.
We moved it to a DN, a private conversation.
So I'm going to tell you how that experience was for me.
Oh,
okay.
I'm so here for this. Okay.
So I was living my life and I was on Facebook. And you know how on Facebook, when you comment on somebody's page, it pops up on yours? I don't know if it still does that because I don't have Facebook. I'm looking at the wrong person.
Yeah.
I don't know if it still does that.
Ambreia and Kevin are much smarter than I, and they have left Facebook years ago. I'm
We're not
slow
smarter.
to
We
learn.
just have less patience.
Yeah.
100%.
But
Better boundaries.
But yeah, so on Facebook, it pops up and it shows you when someone you're connected to engages with something.
Yeah.
Most social
Yeah.
medias do that these days. And there was someone it was after one of a ridiculous amount of Black teens men had been killed by the police.
Mhm.
And somebody on your timeline made an inconsiderate and likely racist. I don't remember what the comment was specifically. Post was specifically. Post. And you commented and were like, wait a second, maybe you wrong in this situation. That wasn't your exact words, but it was pretty much the gist. And I was like, who the hell? I don't even know how we got connected on Facebook in the first place. But I just remember seeing that comment and I was like, who the hell is this white woman out here saying stuff? And I was like, am I about to reach out to this white woman that I know in passing and ask her to get together? And I hadn't been in Wyoming long, and I was very scared. Very scared about how to adapt to culture here. Because I remember when we were moving, before we moved from Dallas, which is, especially the part I was, is primarily Black and Mexican American. And I graduated high school in a school that had like mostly white and Asian. But outside of that, and that was for one specific year, I wasn't around a lot of white people.
Yeah.
But as we know, culture, like whiteness is the culture of the United States.
Mhm.
So I was familiar with the culture, but I didn't have an intimate relationship with a white person. And I was lonely.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, this is scary, but I know at the very least, this is someone who is willing to communicate with people they know about race and identity. And for me, that was enough to try. And so then I reached out. Like you said, I sent a message. We agreed on a time to meet, and I met you in person. And I was like, oh, it's pretty cool. And I was like, okay, you made a choice. And you did find the place to connect that you were looking for. And I would say since then, I don't know if there's ever been a race conversation that I've wanted to have or an identity conversation and I've strayed from it. We've talked about some pretty heavy things through the years. And I found a place that it was okay to just show up authentically and not try to reform and do all that other stuff.
That is one of the things I cherish about our relationship, right? Like just showing up as my full self in all the messiness.
Mhm.
And yeah.
And I feel like what was really interesting about that whole thing is, we have a lot of things that are different. And I know like at different times we've talked about how like, you're raising future white men and I'm raising a future Black man and a future Black woman. But even though that was different, we had so many things in common.
Yeah.
Like navigating the messiness of life. Like, what if you think this and that person thinks that, but y'all have to be in community with each other? Just we were literally living and also kind of modeling in our lives the tension of people are different.
Mm.
And as nice as it sounds to separate and disconnect, you would have nobody if you only looked for people who are the same.
Yeah. Yeah, we've talked a lot about this on the podcast in previous episodes of like, we're all in our echo chambers. We're all with our people.
Yep.
And that's part of the problem.
Yep.
We got to get out of those echo chambers. And I will say, like, we work on our friendship. It takes work. We do get to show up authentically, but we've had hard conversations.
Yep.
And we've both committed, like, we're going to get through this conversation.
Yep.
We're going to have it because it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we met we were both just young mothers, super lonely for different reasons, right? We both were away from our family, so we didn't have that family support raising children.
That looks like a cinnamon.
You like my cinnamon? I made a cinnamon bun.
Mm-hmm.
I made a cinnamon bun with my sensory dough.
I'll make a clock.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. We've never said it out loud, but like, on the surface, we don't have anything in common. Like our upbringing, our everything, an unlikely duo.
Yeah.
But discovering just how much we actually did have in common. And if we would all just make the effort to get to know the people that like, oh, we'd have nothing in common. We'd never make it. We're all missing out on potential lifelong friends.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the things that, I don't know if I've ever said this to you explicitly, but one of the things that, again, was very different was our religious upbringing. But having that chasm after leaving those communities is one of the things that also brought us closer.
Yes.
Because I remember, like, you were the only person here that I could connect with and be like, my belief system was my culture.
Yeah.
I have to distance myself from that belief system. Who am I?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I miss my songs. I miss my tradition.
I want to sing hymns. Yeah.
All of that, right? All of that. And that's something that I think, especially in the in the circles that we're in, it's not often discussed because a lot of folks are just like, well, I just distance myself from beliefs altogether. And it's like, no, my belief system was core to who I was.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't like the way people used it to hurt me.
Yes. And the grief you have from leaving, like you left for all the right reasons. It was not healthy. It was harmful. but not having a space to grieve what you lost, which was community, which was culture, which was, I didn't know who I was outside of Mormonism.
I think I used to call you spicy white. Because you were white, but you were cultured. You had a specific set of traditions to tie yourself to. So it was like, whereas like a lot of, I'm a firm believer that there actually is a culture of whiteness. But because it's homogenized, it's not always visible because it is kind of like seen as a standard thing. But I remember, like, again, you being involved with specific like religious experiences, you having, these are the foods we made when someone had a baby. These are the songs we sung. We had to be at church at these times. Like, I remember I just always being like, okay, well, on paper, and it was another reminder, I have these all the time, that the way we describe people are so binary and ineffective. Because on paper, you're a white person, right?
Yeah.
But how many things of mainstream whiteness could you connect to?
Yeah. Yeah. And that was where my loneliness came from, was like, it was just assumed. Like, I'm comfortable in these spaces, and I was actually navigating how to be a white person in a world that couldn't claim the things that make, like, the quirkiness. Bo, still to this day, my husband, I'll put on like a floral print dress and he'll be like, you look very Mormon today. And my fashion choices are still influenced by my upbringing. My Dolly.
It's part of our ASMR.
Dolly's.
Dolly's.
My dog digging into the carpet right under the mic. You know that's getting picked up.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, like my inability to shop at Sam's Club and not bring home like a 40-pound bag of flour for my food storage that I don't even do anymore, but it's just so...
What were you making with 40 pounds of flour?
You gotta have 3 months of food storage.
Yes.
3 months.
No more.
The world shuts down. Bo hated it until COVID happened, and I had a Sam's Club ream of toilet paper when everybody was out. It's like, this is the moment Mormons have been preparing for.
Did he give you your flowers?
Yeah.
Good.
He did.
Yeah.
He did. We had beans, we had rice, we had toilet paper when everybody else was struggling.
Toilet paper. Well, if you eat that many beans, you're gonna need toilet paper. So that's good.
Oh,
It's very good.
Oh, man.
But yeah, thinking about that piece of like the traditions we come from, and knowing that like so much of the conversations that y'all have are around abortion, it's like interesting to me how like the things that ground us are the things that remove us from ourselves at the same time.
Yeah.
Because one of the reasons that I didn't really feel that comfortable in my belief system is partially because, a number of reasons. One, like I just always have thought a little bit different. 2, like I'm a queer Black woman. And 3, I had an abortion. And there's either an expectation of silence or there's a denial of experience or a shaming, and so that kind of leaves you in this place is like, okay, well, if I can't talk about it, I can't process it.
Yeah.
And I got tired of not processing stuff. So it was just like, okay, well, we just out here in these streets having had an abortion, feeling like we were the biggest shame that anyone has ever known. Not feeling comfortable telling the family because I was supposed to be like the smart, good girl.
Yeah.
And just feeling really fragmented.
Yeah. And having to process that. In order to process that, you had to leave everything that was safe and home, right? Like you had to, part of that belief system and changing culture, like letting go of that. I don't have all the things that used to make me feel peace.
Yeah.
Sunday service, singing hymns. Like, that's the place where I feel the least safe. And going into different spaces where it is safe to process abortion and all the things. And those communities
Don't know you.
requiring you leave those at the door
Yep.
because that's in our first episode. I talked about like, I don't know if people are going to be okay getting into talking about God and beliefs
Religion,
Yep.
yeah.
and religion. Because a lot of the spaces, progressive spaces, whatever spaces, like there's a deep chasm and a
Correct.
separation
Mhm.
and almost a requirement that you leave that at the door when you come into this space. And you're like, I need that though.
Yeah.
That's what makes me feel safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm so grateful we created that space for each other and we were able to, yeah.
Remember that time we sat in front of the Outlaw and we didn't go in?
Yeah.
Why were we there?
We were going to go dancing.
We were going to go dancing and we just sat out in front instead of going in.
Yeah.
That's dumb.
That's
We should have went dancing.
we were going to go dancing.
We went dancing once, right? And then we talked about going dancing like 52 other times.
Yeah. I had it saved in my
Maybe
calendar.
Yeah,
we were
me
going to
too.
go monthly.
We made a calendar invite.
Like a recurring event?
To go dancing and we went
We
once.
only did it.
And it was before we made the calendar invite.
Like, this is great. I feel like so present and in my body. We need to dance more. Let's make a standing monthly date. And it never happened.
You still got time.
There's still time. You want to come dance?
Yeah.
Come on.
Do the
Yeah.
next podcast episode at the juke joint.
Do we?
The juke joint is what old black people used to call I'm sure people
have
other than old black
Do we have a juke joint?
Yeah, the Cadillac is a juke joint.
Is it?
The Outlaw, do they dance there?
I
Yeah.
think you can, yeah.
That's
they
a juke
like
joint.
cowboy dance.
It's called a juke
like line
joint because a
dancing.
juke machine.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay.
And you just go there and dance.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Cadillac is worthy of.
The juke joint title. Probably not. My ancestors would be ashamed. Especially on hip hop night.
Yeah. In those library meetups, right? We did keep those. Those were we met
We did go with that.
often. We were desperate for community.
Yeah.
And we went all the time. And it was actually at one of those library meetups where I discovered I hadn't quite processed. I was relearning a lot of very bad things that I was taught as a child and like how I view the world and what I believe, relearning and figuring all that out. And I thought I was all the way there on abortion, right? Like
Yeah.
my body, my choice, all of that. I was all in. And then your personal abortion story came up. And I realized that it was the very first elective abortion,
Mhm.
personal recount of an elective abortion. And I got a little sweaty. I was like, oh, I don't know what to say. I didn't realize I had feelings to process about this. And I need to be here for my friend and show up and I didn't know how.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you were aware of that. Were you aware of
I don't
that?
think so.
So I did an okay job of
I don't think I was aware of it, but like something that's sticking out to me hearing you say that is as the person who had the abortion, I had something to process. So of course you have something to process. And I think like one of the things that we run into a lot with abortion conversations and abortion stories and just life in general, because of course like abortion is a specific issue, but the world is filled with issues,
Yeah.
you know, that we have different feelings on, is that it's human to not know how to respond. It's human to be uncomfortable. It's
Mhm.
human to be afraid, but we're often so busy looking for that perfect response that we don't give a real response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I would love more, like if in that stage, because I don't know that I was as, this was before 2020.
Yeah.
What year I'm trying to remember what year. I think it was 10 years after my abortion when I was comfortable actually talking about the story. It took 10 years. And so if it was me and my body that went through that experience of having an abortion and hadn't processed it 10 years later, how would I expect you to be able to hold all of that when you were hearing the story for the first time? Or anyone else?
Yeah.
It wouldn't make any sense because I was still processing that experience, you know?
Right.
So to me, it kind of gets to ASMR today. To me, it kind of gets to the messiness, like we were just talking about relationships, is being in the process with someone. Because as you said, you didn't know what to say, but you knew you cared about me.
Yes.
And how many times will we respond differently if we stopped with what we knew and instead went with who do we care about?
Right.
And if you care about me, we'll talk and dialogue this together. Because at the end of the day, and I'm still working on this myself, it doesn't matter how you feel about my abortion.
Yeah.
So there's also this decentering process that has to happen of like, you want to be there. Dang, all this ASMR coming. I shouldn't have made that joke.
We're going to be coughing through this entire podcast.
Like, you want to be there for me, but I feel like the other side of that coin is that it doesn't matter who's there for you in the moments that you don't know how to be there for yourself.
Yeah.
And I was at such a transition moment that I couldn't have noticed how you felt, because in my mind, anytime I said it, I heard baby killer. I heard someone like throwing some kind of mean thing, or like, you're selfish. How dare you? Another like narrative that's really common in the Black community is around race genocide. You killed a Black person. You're always talking about the experiences of the state. Like, again, getting into that religion and how like reproductive oppression and like religion often kind of create this really painful cocktail of experiences for people who are already marginalized, you know? And so I was so busy trying to make sense of that stuff, I can't even tell you we had that conversation. Because I was just like, oh God.
You were processing your own stuff. We were both processing some things.
Look, you were like, Ambreia, what? And I was like, Ambreia, what? So we were just there together.
Yeah, and I think about it all the time of how it's that experience, our experience, that we were both processing, unbeknownst to the other. Why I'm so passionate about this podcast, because these are the conversations that have to be had for people to get from one place to the other. Unfortunately, our podcast listeners don't adore you and love you as much as I do.
You'd be surprised.
They
you don't know who knows.
The first 15 minutes, everybody's fallen in love with Ambreia for sure. But like, I just cared about you so much and had conflicting feelings and like, I don't know what to do with this. And I'm just not going to say anything, and I'm going to listen and I'm going to learn. And it has carried me through. Like, I think about it all the time. I think about when I'm listening to anti-abortion rhetoric about the potential that is lost. Ambreia is the person I think about, because without your abortion, we don't have your beautiful children now. Like, we don't have this life. You don't marry your husband.
Yep.
And that is 2 potential lives, a beautiful marriage,
yep,
your career, all of it. None of that happens.
So many things. And this feels like a good segue to just be like,
let's hear your abortion story.
Pieces of my abortion story. I'm trying to decide what parts of the story to share. Well, do you want here's a teenager making interesting choices, like distant view, or do you want the factual and sequential view?
Factual and sequential.
Okay. So the factual and sequential view is that I was 17 years old. I made a choice to have sex with a friend of mine. We made that choice together, is a better way to say that. And something I didn't think about until many years later is that there was this moment that something kind of interesting happened, and I didn't know what that was because there's not a lot of anatomy emphasis. And I found out later that he finished to me without permission. And I asked that question and he said no, but obviously there was a kid. So, but yeah, so I waited for my period. It didn't come. I took a pregnancy test. It was positive. And I, at first, had a lot of I had a lot of feelings and fear. And I think one of the things that's interesting about my story is it gets out of the binaries, and while it was an elective abortion, I was a minor. And so as a minor in the nation we have, like, parents, they control a lot of what goes around with the children. And so I was a child potentially having a child. And I know wholeheartedly that was the best decision for me with the place that I was at. And also, it took many years for me to talk with my parents and actually tell them that they kind of spearheaded that decision for me. And that was another layer of complication and healing and all of these other kind of things, because me being there, and eventually I was like, yeah, let's go ahead and do this. But there was a period where I was like, no, I think I'm going to just be a teen mom. And my parents were like, no, you have like so many different things happening. We have enough challenges that we're facing right now. We cannot handle that challenge on top of everything else. And so I went, my mom took me. I went to get a termination. I remember going through the process of having that phone call where you have to listen to all of the, here are the risks, and here are this, and here are that. And me being like, I don't want to do this phone counseling.
And this is in Texas.
Correct.
Yes.
This is in Texas. And I remember, so I remember doing the phone counseling, and I remember my mom and I driving that day. And my abortion story has always stayed with me, not just because of that. It really was a transition period in my life, for the better, interestingly enough, but it was a transition. Happened on Martin Luther King Day. So it was the day we happened to be out of school. The abortion clinic happened to be open, and Martin Luther King's niece is actually one of the biggest anti-abortion proponents in the United States. And she is very intentional about this idea that Black people having abortions is a essential piece of genocide within the Black community. So every year on Martin Luther King Day, I sit here and I'm like, okay, well, this is the day someone says I committed genocide. So that's, yeah, which is why it took me 10 years to have
so many layers.
Yeah.
Why it took me 10 years to have any peace with it. But in terms of the process itself, I remember getting there. I remember protesters. I remember the guy who I was pregnant by being like, don't do this. I remember being under the laughing gas because I don't remember the exact amount of weeks I was, but I was pretty early. I remember the person there saying, oh, you did good getting here. It's really early, which is like, how do you hold a compliment in that circumstance? It's layered and complicated anyway. I remember being forced to look at an ultrasound. And I remember being under the gas, and I've always been a nerd, and asking, are these tissues going to be donated for fetal tissue research or for stem cells?
Baby, that is the most Ambreia response I've ever heard.
I was like, are these tissues going to be donated for stem cell research? And he was like, no, we can't do that here. And I remember being like, oh.
Wow.
And like, I remember like the different size tubes for the different stations. And then afterwards, my mom and I left. But I also remember feeling more connected and closer to my mom than I ever had because she didn't treat me like I was raggedy or like broken or needed to be thrown away.
Or a child, even.
Correct. She did. And I remember we were kind of like laughing at one funny thing happened while we were in the waiting room. I don't remember what it was. And I remember just being like, how are we finding something to laugh at?
Yeah.
The world is like, my world is imploding. There are protesters with signs saying I'm a baby killer.
Yeah.
How are we finding a moment to laugh? How am I concerned about stem cells? How am I, like, all of these different things? And then the next day or the day after, I had school. I had to go to school. And I remember, because it was so close after the termination, that I couldn't do dance class, and I had to tell my teacher. And I think for that first day, I might actually have been around campus in a wheelchair. I think I have my memories, because of trauma can be kind of blurry sometimes. Yeah. And that was kind of a high emotional moment. But I know I wasn't in gym class, and I don't remember if I was doing that much walking at all because, again, I had literally just had my body opened up. And, when you have a baby and your cervix is open. So I'm pretty sure that actually did happen.
Wow.
So you had a doctor's note for dance class or what? Like, how does...
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Texas.
Yeah, it makes me want to go look at the history and what restrictions were in place during that time and what has changed. Like,
I'm sure it's
what
more
is
expensive.
that? More expensive. There's so many more restrictions.
Yeah.
And how different a 17-year-old's experience would be today.
Today, it wouldn't happen.
It wouldn't happen,
You couldn't
right?
have access.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
don't have access.
You
It would
would have
include
no-
travel. It would be going
Yeah.
out of state.
It would. And if that were the case, it wouldn't have been possible for me because my parents weren't together. And I remember, like, my mom was like, okay, well, we have to take our daughter to this experience. And it was $300.
That's a
And
lot of money.
It
when
was a
you're-
lot of money at once. And she
Yeah.
had to ask him for that money
Mm.
because we didn't have it. We didn't have an extra $300 to terminate a pregnancy. But if you don't have $300 to terminate a pregnancy, you don't have $300 to feed a new child.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's true.
Oh.
You don't have $300 for anything. So the context of me having that abortion, again, there's no doubt in my mind now that that was a wonderfully transformative experience for me, in how it ended. But the process to that transformation was trauma. It was a lot of pain. And again, the guy that I got pregnant by, we were friends, but we weren't friends after because he wanted me to go forward with the pregnancy. And he ended up, like, I won't get into the long, complicated version of it, but he ended up in a relationship with someone not much later. We were both single at the time. And when she found out and believed I was going forward with the pregnancy, she got pregnant on purpose.
Oh.
So my child would have been in queue with a sibling. And it actually also turned out that woman was domestically violent against him. So again, I often reflect on to be connected to their father, they would have been inherently in an abusive situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's so many layers and dynamics to that.
Holy cow.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember specifically I didn't remember until I heard you telling the story. Because you were processing, like, did I make that choice?
Yeah.
That was the first conversation we
Yeah.
had, where you almost felt like you didn't have a say in that.
Yep. And that's still true. As a minor, my choice was limited.
Yeah.
My choice was definitely limited. Where my choice came in is to accept the circumstance. So I chose to accept the circumstance. I mean, I don't see this happening, but like the guy was like, you can come be here and we'll get married and we'll do this together. And it's like, man, you don't even like me like that. I'm not going to get married to you just to have a child. Like,
Yeah.
we're not doing that. But
you were picturing possibly like a single mother. Like, that was more.
I didn't even make it that far.
Yeah.
I don't even know. Cause like I said, I was probably 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Literally had, like, the way that it happened is, let's say today's Sunday, let's say I found out that I was pregnant today. My abortion was scheduled by the end of the week.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I hardly had time to have a missed period.
Dang.
Yeah. I'm again, maybe like a week and a half, 2 weeks. Cause there is this really interesting moment, and this is random. So if y'all need to cut it, you can. But, that I ended up, my family, is from Louisiana, before Texas. And I remember my grandfather's mother was actually dying. And we went to her funeral, and I was pregnant at her funeral. And I remember sitting on both ends of the life spectrum and also having like this deep sense of like shame that I was about to not continue the lineage as she was leaving.
Mm-hmm.
So there was so much happening.
Yeah.
There was so much happening for a 17-year-old.
17.
Poor 17-year-old me. That's what
Or 17.
it's just like, ooh, too much to process.
Yeah. No wonder it took you 10 years to even be able to say it out loud.
10 years. Because at first, you were mentioning like accepting the choice or seeing myself as responsible or whatever. I had to learn to accept that. And the reason I did, because I found that I was hiding in the narrative of victimhood.
Mm.
And there are lots of people who victimhood is their experience in that, right?
Yeah.
Being forced into situations in violent circumstances, emotional manipulation, all of these other kind of things. But I know until the moment I accepted that choice and accepted that that was the decision that if I had the capacity, I would have wanted for myself.
Yeah.
Before that, I wanted to be someone you could pity instead of hate.
Mm.
I wanted you to be like, oh, poor Ambreia, that's so sad that that happened to you, as opposed to you're a baby killer like everybody else.
Right.
So I was like, you know what?
You're looking for a
Mhm.
softer.
Yep, a softer land.
Yeah.
I didn't want to distance myself from those other people anymore, so I just accepted it. And of course, the truth of the matter is it's complicated. It will always be complicated.
It will always.
Yeah.
Every single story, every single choice, it's all those layers. I have chills, not because I'm cold, just like
Because I'm sweating.
this is. Yeah, that was super vulnerable, and if you need to take a break, refill water. Like that's a lot. It made me think of
No, it's gonna fall.
talking about that specific aspect. One of the anti-abortion's tactics right now is to focus on coerced abortions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's not even a black and white issue
Nope.
all the time. Ambreia just,
It's not.
Yeah.
it's just not. No aspect of these decisions are black and white.
Right.
It is not, because I used to be like, well, maybe you should have ran away, or maybe you should have done this, or maybe you should have done that. But I didn't want to have a baby with that person.
Yeah.
And I didn't I struggle to imagine a parallel universe where I went forward with that decision.
Yeah.
But I just can't imagine it. I think so much of who I am and what has happened would be different in my life. And I don't think it would be for the better.
Right.
I don't think it would be for the better. Yeah.
I don't know. Well, for one, I don't have my friend Ambreia. You don't come to Cheyenne. You don't.
Yep, that's true.
You're not a published New York Times journalist. Like that's not a thing. That doesn't happen. All of it.
Yes, this is so cool. Look at it. It's like a kangaroo Pikachu snowman.
It's cute. That's cute. We're taking pictures and we're going to post it with, this will be the photo for the podcast is our creations.
Bring my A game.
Yes, our artwork.
Yeah, a lot would be different. And I don't know, it's just interesting because I'm such an I'm a completely different person than I was at 17.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I understand we all move under the illusion of choice. Because again, like comparing our situations, you also had your first child as a teen.
Yep.
And again, illusion of choice, right?
Yeah.
Like you didn't terminate, but
that was not an option. I never even considered.
Correct. But
Yeah.
did you, if you don't have all options, do you
Yep.
really have choice?
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten into that conversation. I've done the 3,000 feet overlook of like, I chose to have a baby.
Yeah.
I was actually 20 when I had the baby, but I was pregnant at 19
Mhm.
and I chose to not have an abortion. Did I have a choice?
Nope.
No,
You did not.
no,
You did not.
it was not an option for me. And then having those, it's taken me like the last 3 years. How do I even talk about that without it sounding like
Regret?
regret?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I love my life. And me not choosing to have an abortion is why I'm an activist, is why, like, what brought me to this work. None of that happens.
Mhm.
You do the best you have with the information you have and the quote unquote choices you have at the time.
Right.
Yep.
And it's definitely not the government's role.
You do. And I feel like one of the really important things to like explicitly call out in this conversation is, a lot of my work is around like motherhood and mothering. And if you've gone through the process of being the primary caregiver for a child, that shit's hard as fuck.
Yeah.
You would never intentionally wish on a person to go through the extremely taxing and overwhelming process of raising another human, let alone in this climate where women, especially Black and Native women, are dying 3 to 4 times at the rate during labor. Like, like you don't have any resources. There's war everywhere. You can't afford food. Like, why? How can you force someone to go forward with birthing and then say that you're pro-life as you're setting them up for death, as you're setting them up for struggle? And then, don't forget, shame them for needing support.
Right.
Yes.
And stigmatize that. And do, so it's just like, what do you really want?
Yeah.
To stay out of other people's business.
Stay out of other people's business. Focus on other things that really need our solutions. like giving folks who need the support. How do we?
Because another one of like, you know, with my work with Free Black Motherhood, a lot of my effort is, this is so cool. Look at
That
it.
is really great.
A lot of my like work is around like emotional regulation, seeing motherhood as a place to like learn more about yourself, be present, things of that nature. And again, we have so many conversations expecting people to give birth, but I also think about how many of us are pregnant or delivering at times we don't even have a sense of self. We don't have any emotional regulation. And what happens when you do that? You're putting a child in a potentially violent situation. And then you're watching conflict happen. They don't have the needs that they have. There's then, you know, like this cycle of like trauma continues. And it's just hard for me to believe that it is better for me to just go forward and set off this chain reaction than it is for me to say, actually, maybe later, but right now, it's not the time.
Not the time.
Not forever.
Yeah.
And if it is forever, that's cool, you know, but not forever. But right now, this is not the life that I want to bring another person into.
Yeah. I don't know if I want to say this on the podcast. I'm going to say it and decide if I'm going to make you cut it later.
Okay.
Because I've never spoken it out loud, but I've thought about it a whole lot. How dangerous, because I was very disconnected with my choice of continuing that pregnancy at 19. I did not feel any of the excitement that I was pregnant. It was a shotgun wedding. We went in, like I busied myself planning wedding. I was incredibly sick. So a lot of that was just a lot of sleeping and puking. And when my son was born, and I just think the shame I feel is like, I wish I could have been better. I could have been better. I did not. I was so scared because I was counting on that story of, and then they place the baby in your arms and you are overwhelmed with a love you've never felt before.
Yeah.
And I didn't have it. And I was like, oh, I was panicked. Like, I was waiting for that because I didn't feel any of it while I was pregnant. I didn't feel it with the kicks. I didn't feel it with any of the things.
Yeah.
Was counting on that to happen because that's what we're told as mothers. It will just be natural. And I remember the moment that I did feel it. And it wasn't until my son smiled at me. So how many months is that?
Usually it's about 6 weeks, right?
Yeah. So
a month and a half.
A month and a half. I had to set alarms because my son was born at 36 weeks. He didn't cry when he was hungry. And so he lost a lot of weight right out the gate. I had never done this. I'd never breastfed before. I didn't know what I was doing. He lost a ton of weight, so I had to set alarms to feed him. And every time that alarm went off, I was so resentful. I hated that I had to get up. I was so sore. I had stitches, so many stitches.
Did you say you also had mastitis?
I got mastitis. I was a wreck. And I hated it.
Yeah.
I hated it. And how dangerous is that?
So dangerous.
I did not realize that I suffered from postpartum depression until I had my second son, which was planned. We made the choice, tried for a baby, got a baby. And it was my ex-husband who years later, I was like, when I was processing, I think I had really bad postpartum depression. And he said to me, I was worried when we had our second son that you loved him more. Like it was so apparent and visible and how much I was struggling to adjust to this motherhood role that I'd been thrust in. And I just, like, it breaks my heart for my son. And of course, he doesn't remember any of this. And that's why I hesitate to even say it on a podcast. I'd hate for him to hear it. But like, yeah, that scares the hell out of me. Like putting other people in that position of, and I felt like I chose it, right? I didn't have any of the baggage of like, I wanted an abortion. I didn't have that going on. And I still had the severe postpartum depression, struggled to adapt to motherhood, was desperate for those feelings of warm fuzzy and a love you've never felt. And I didn't get that for 6 weeks.
Wow.
Yep.
And the first time he smiled at me, I was sitting on the couch breastfeeding and I just sobbed like, oh, thank God. There it is.
There it is.
There it is.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's just so dangerous to, and I didn't have the support. Nobody flagged me for postpartum depression. I was doing great at all my checkups. And yeah.
All 2 of them.
All 2 of them in the 6 weeks. Yeah.
All 2 of them.
Which is about all I had before they dropped me on Medicaid. You know, you only have your first postpartum checkup. And then I didn't have any health care and didn't have a single. And even though
Extended it to 12 weeks now, right?
in
12
Wyoming,
months.
in Wyoming, they fought real hard. And now mothers
Thank God.
can be on for at least a year, which is so important for somebody to be able to catch those things.
Yeah.
Because even though I did get those like, oh, a love you've never felt before when my son smiled at me, I still had very severe postpartum depression.
Yeah.
And no support.
All right.
Yeah.
Yep. And again, like so much of how we talk about abortion and motherhood is intertwined because it's connected to this idea that no, you are a woman, you should be giving birth.
Yep.
You are supposed to be having children, and that is natural for you.
Yep.
And it is easy, and it is what you are created to do. But also, what if you don't connect with that?
Yeah.
And what if you're different? And what if you're not emotional? Or what if you're a more active father than the mother is? Or what if you have like a different family circumstance? Like there's all of these possibilities, and we're still trying to hold on to this cookie cutter thing.
Yeah.
Because I am not an affectionate person generally. I'm learning to be more that way now that I'm in different parts of life. But for a long time, I was like, well, I'm obviously a terrible mother because I don't have this urge to hug and to kiss and to comfort and to do all of those other things. And I felt a lot of guilt about that.
Yeah.
And those were with the children I chose to have. So I would feel really bad about it. And it wasn't until I accepted that there's not a specific way to perform motherhood that I understood I wasn't broken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's always an opportunity to say you're broken if you go forward with a pregnancy and you're not joyful. You're broken if you don't. It's literally the damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. So.
And I just made this connection to like Kevin's experience as a same-sex couple marriage, all of that entire narrative and how it would affect like 2 dads. And that's part of the stigma of adoption with same-sex couples. Like it's all connected. How can you ever be a good parent when you don't have that, they place them in your arms. You're not a mother.
It's true.
Yeah.
It is all connected.
I would
It's
agree.
all connected. And Kevin's a badass dad. Kevin and Sean Day. Like so good. Like, but this emphasis we put on it's only the mothers that can feel these feelings and provide that type of care. And
Yeah, it was a pressure for us to step up, right? Like that we had something to prove, right? Is the perception that I had going into it.
yeah.
Because it really wasn't supposed to be natural for us to just be able to jump in and do that, right? So it was I felt I was always having to prove something to somebody that I could be a really great parent, right? That I had this natural instinct to do all of these things. And I don't know, more of it was in my head, I think. I don't know that maybe people had that perception and never said the words to me, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like, thank you for sharing that. That's really valid. Not that you need my validity. Your experience is yours, so it's valid in that. But I feel like the other connection to this thread is that idea that a mother should be self-sufficient, or two fathers isn't, or like whatever the dynamic is, a grandmother isn't sufficient, all these other things. They're rooted in individualism.
Yeah.
Because it's like, y'all had a baby, right?
Mm-hmm.
But all the women on earth disappeared.
Yeah.
It's like you could never find, you don't have a mother or an aunt or a cousin or a trusted friend. It's just like, nope, you two men had a child.
And that's it.
And there's no women. Where did all the women go?
They abandoned us.
Yes. It's like disgusting. The women are gone. It's like, or we could say that as parents and caregivers, we raise our children, give them the best that they can, and the community collaboratively make sure that they're shaped into the people they have to be.
100%.
Yeah. Imagine how many dumb things would go away if we looked at it that way,
100%.
You don't have to be everything. I don't have to be everything.
Yeah.
We're all a piece to a larger puzzle. And that's that.
Yeah.
But instead we want to say, nope, this is the everything, but she's actually not adequate, so he can't do it, so they can just shut up.
We're just making things so much more difficult. And the community, all our decisions are based on legislative decisions, everything. If we could get back to the community, all our roles and what we do need to be worried about whether the kids on the south side are eating lunch, right?
100%.
They're not my kids, but our
but
decisions.
They are kids. And they need a meal, right?
Yeah. And don't forget, and again, thinking about that individualism and that sense of disconnect, y'all's child, wonderful in a loving environment, right? But if you say my house is the only thing that matters, and my house, and your house is the only thing that matters, and my house is terrible, eventually your child is going to interact with my child and potentially make their lives hell because I could not provide that space, that sense of self, that stability. And again, this interconnectedness is probably the only actual effective no child left behind policy. Because we know the first one didn't go there.
The first one did not work out.
But again, there's none of us exist in a vacuum. Even the isolated people don't exist in a vacuum. So when we decide, and it's again, that's what's hilarious to me. We have these conversations of oh, well, you shouldn't have this much assistance because you should do it yourself or blah, blah, blah. And it's whether you help me now or wait until life later, it's going to affect you.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's going to affect you because your child is going to be bullied at school.
Yep.
It's going to affect you because your child and my child might decide to get married one day and have children, and your grandkids going to be crazy. Aside from you, and not just me. But again, it's hilarious to me how our vision is so limited because it is, again, anchored in individualism. And it's, well, what can I do? And outside of what I can provide you, nothing else exists.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's just not effective.
No.
We solved it all here today.
We did. Yeah.
We have the answers, everyone.
Yeah.
Get back to community.
So as a side note, again, tangent, feel free to cut. Is that my best friend and I, we have all kinds of conversations. And one of the conversations we had, we jokes that we solved. It started out, interestingly enough, as a abortion conversation. That was, he was not aware possibly at the time that it had anti-abortion rhetoric attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the conversation was kind of setting up a binary about women having the option to seek abortion services, on papers. Of course, there's all these layers, complications, barriers, and that men don't have a comparable option. And so they were kind of saying, okay, well, child abortion here, and men end up with child support. And so I won't get into all of the weeds of it. But in the end, we had this really interesting conversation that may or may not, some may agree with, some may not, and I'm fine with that, that the conversations and conflicts we have around child support are really about wanting to make sure people who produced a child are like that someone is responsible for that child.
Yeah.
But we all work in this society. Each individual person brings a benefit to society in the form of taxes, in the form of all of these different things. Why is the state not responsible for making sure children have the services that they need?
Yeah.
Because again, like all these other conversations aside, this nation exists from us.
Yeah.
The work that we do. If my child grows up to be the next Neil deGrasse Tyson or whatever, the U.S. benefits from that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So why have we normalized this idea that our nation continuously benefits from us, but we don't deserve some type of safety net or support system to offer in exchange?
Yeah.
And so like once we got into that, we realized that if every child was taken care of, like at a baseline, these arguments about child support, incarcerating people who can't afford it, all these other kind of things, they wouldn't exist.
They wouldn't exist.
But instead, we're arguing about child support. So here we are.
Join us next week for part 2 of our conversation with Ambreia on It's Personal, Not Political with Marcie and Kevin, a production of Wyoming United for Freedom, Inc. This episode was written and directed by Marcie Kindred, edited and produced by me, Kevin Ogle. Our theme song, Wyoming, was created by Jeff F. at Mr. Boo Daddy on socials. Podcast art created by Chris Arneson and incorporates Wyoming United for Freedom, Inc.'s logo, designed by Addie Jenkins. Until next time, stay united and remember, pregnancy is personal, not political. Let's keep sharing our stories and change the narrative.